welcome delegates to a presentation from Community Development Alliance Scotland. I'm the chair of SeaDash, Chris Woodness, and I'm joined by my colleague and SeaDash coordinator, Colette McGarver.
Hello.
So we were uncertain and unsure as to how many participants we would have today. So I don't think we're going to need the breakout room necessarily unless we get a flood of people coming in. So a little bit of background to SeaDash. We're a national networked organisation covering Scotland. We are constituted from regional and national organisations primarily supporting community development practice and, for many, delivering community development through their organisations, of which we have over 125 members and building. And they each have a role to play through their own strong coalition in supporting the work of SeaDash to address strong change and develop a shared understanding of community development approach, providing valuable network organisation in order to create a more socially just and equal society through Scotland, and through our practice and the information that we share, expand that onto a wider platform. And Colette will be able to expand upon that when she speaks shortly. We're governed as a charitable organisation by a management group of trustees with representatives from Participatory Budgeting Scotland, the Scottish Refugee Council, the BMIS, which is a national ethnic minority-led umbrella body representing ethnic minority voluntary organisations throughout Scotland. We also have representation from Community Learning and Development Standards Council, and they're the professional body for community development and CLD practitioners in Scotland. And CLD Standards Council have a strong partnership and allegiance with IADD, building as they did the professional standards network. So we also represented the Scottish Community, NHS, National Health Service, Inclusion Scotland, and Inclusion Scotland are the representative body for people with disabilities in Scotland. And each of these representatives as trustees do so of their own volition. There's no three-line whip, there's no expectations that they should participate as members. They do so because they share a common understanding and a recognition of the common values that we as community development practitioners have. We're also represented by the local authority governing body under CLDMS, which is Community Learning and Development Managers Scotland, and as well as voluntary organisations such as the Culture Garden and Chestnut and Stroke Scotland. So a wide representation of organisations from the voluntary sector through the statutory and government representation within the makeup of our constituent body. And George, if you could move to slide 2, please. Or slide 3, sorry.
Okay. Can we all see my screen?
Yes, thank you, George. That's it, that's the one. So the main strands of the work that we deliver on are primarily network building to expand the role and the presence of SeaDash, Community Development Alliance Scotland, and influence policy and practice at governmental and local authority level, as well as organisational, and influence and carry out our influences on the practice that's delivered by practitioners, whether they're paid or unpaid, but a shared common understanding of community development is endemic throughout, and more latterly, as has affected many of our representatives, not only in Scotland, but across the world throughout this pandemic. Our response, as it was at the time to COVID-19, as it is now, and the recovery stage throughout that, and the role that community development and practitioners can play. So that's a key focus for us throughout this coming year, and we believe 2 or 3 years into the future. Through the activities that we have built strategic partnership, and we continue to do so, not only through organizations, but individual members. And Collect develops our monthly bulletins that are thematic, and quarterly have a specific theme that we operate to, and that bulletin then goes out to the members and is accessible once delivered online. It's available through our website. We also host a national conference, and we've been successful in having representation by Scottish ministers with a particular policy remit for community development. We support and engage in the development of briefings and publications, and the ever-growing role and responsibility of social media outreach and influence on our Twitter feeds, Facebook page, and also within our partner networks. And next slide, please, George.
Okay. I don't know why it's.
Is it not moving at all?
Yeah, is that it?
Yep. There we go.
Sorry for that delay.
The policy framework in Scotland, as it stands, is not specific to community development and the practice of community development. It in turn references community development, whether it's placemaking and 20-minute neighborhoods, the development of town architecture, and the movement of people. That sits within placemaking and place standards. Health and well-being and the Citizens' Assembly are relatively new themes for Scottish policy. But there is a firm recognition of the role that community development plays within that. We also operate to the National Occupational Standards and ensure that not only our partners and our membership recognise the National Occupational Standards for community development, but they're also recognised and built into the practice, policy-making practice of the Scottish Government. And that's seen and evident through the Community Empowerment Scotland Act of 2015. And since that document came into force, there have been supporting legislation and guidance documents that have built and contextualized community empowerment to the point where we now see on a regular basis the transference of power, engagement, and community development practice in community ownership of property and facility. Fairer Scotland's duty, the Climate Assembly, Children and Young People's Act are all embroiled within the functions of community development. And we ensure that through the role that we have at Scottish Government level and local authority level, that the delivery systems recognise community development and that they support that. The bottom bullet, though, highlights one of the key problems that we face, particularly in Scotland, in that as we challenge others to think about their role of both locally and nationally, we also have to recognise the current reduction in resources. And that's not only financial resource, but it's also within the context of human resources. It's recognised in Scotland that community development practitioners are in the main an ageing demographic, and as we're ageing, we are moving into a period of retirement and the numbers are continuing to deplete. So we are constantly looking to work with our academic colleagues at university level to build the structures to ensure that we can bring on the next level of qualified practice and practitioners. So there are many challenges around how we ensure that people who face the greatest barriers to participation take advantage of the legislative framework that exists, and to give voice to not only their needs, but their desires and their personal aspirations individually and community-wide. So the focus for us needs to be on ensuring that those voices are heard, are supported, and how they are actively involved. Now, Colette's just going to come in now with so an introduction to some of our members and the voices that they then speak with. Colette.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, we had over 20 people registered for our workshop, and as you know, as a workshop, it will be participative, so we will be involving all of you just shortly, but we're going to run through this PowerPoint first. So George, if I could just have the next slide, please.
Okay. There it is. Is it that one?
Yes, that's fine. So just to recap on a couple of things that Chris said there, we are an NGO, we're a registered Scottish charity with 125 membership organisations. So I want you to kind of hold that thought for a moment, because what I've kind of gained from the conference so far this morning and this afternoon is I haven't really heard much about examples of good practice and co-production. So what I want you to be aware of is that the Community Development Alliance Scotland, our membership organisations are from the voluntary sector, the charity sector, the faith sector, the public sector, and the business sector. So we are a true example of a co-production model of good practice. And so those are some of the comments and impact statements from some of our membership organisations. In Scotland, we have an organisation, Scotland Community Development Network, which is for frontline practitioners. And essentially what we do at SeaDash is we help to coordinate all of these organisations. So in Scotland, we have community planning, which I'm sure in some of your nations you have similar bodies, which are public sector bodies. And in some respects, we are liaised with community planning in order to ensure that we raise awareness of community development at a national level. Who else have we got? The CLD Standards Council, as Chris mentioned. So the impact statements from all of our members obviously is partly evidence for the fact that we are doing what we should be doing in our developmental plan for the year. We also have Chest, Heart, Stroke Scotland. So they're all national organisations who we help to coordinate, and we also help to raise awareness of all of their work. But indeed, what we do try to do is we try to use our platform to educate organisations who perhaps don't have community development as their core background and principles. And as Chris said, as far as the community development professional practice and workforce, we would work very closely with universities and colleagues who deliver programmes, degrees and postgraduate level in community development. But equally, we try to educate organisations who don't have community development as part of the background. When we go into discussing our questions, Chris and I will tell you a little bit more about our backgrounds, but our backgrounds are community development as well as other areas. So next slide, George, please. Public Health Scotland, they have been a real support to SeaDash from the outset, and they've always sat on our board. So as a registered charity, we have about 13 board members who are representatives from all these different organisations. We also have the Scottish Community Development Network, who deliver lots of programmes in Scotland. But again, what I would say about what I've been listening to so far in the conference is we've heard a lot of speakers talk about programmes and programme delivery, and also we've had a lot of academics discussing theory. But this is where I feel that we really need to capture a bit more relating to good policy, marrying with good practice, because that's what we want to strengthen in Scotland through SeaDash. Next slide, please, George. There's Chris's impact statement relating to the function of SeaDash and why SeaDash plays a crucial role in Scotland. And we also have statements there from James Wood. So again, when I say about a true co-production model that we deliver, we also have membership organisations from very broad range of disciplines, including the environment and sustainability background, as well as education, health, housing, social work. When I first started in community development, we were based within social work, housing and health. So we have organisations from very broad range of disciplines. Next slide, please, George.
Please, the next slide.
Yeah, so I think this slide is quite a good slide to demonstrate the marrying of the policy and practice. So we really are proactive as far as our collaborative working, as far as our partnership working. We reach out to the Scottish Government, various departments within Scottish Government, because we want to raise the profile of community development in Scotland at a strategic level. So we do that at, for example, our conference last year, we had senior ministers from the Scottish Government speaking, and equally they came together with frontline practitioners, as well as representatives from SeaDash membership organisations. So it's about the learning for people who work within policy, as well as the learning from people who are frontline practitioners. We also have a number of networking events. I chair some of the European networking events as a board member of IACD, as well as my role in SeaDash. So we always try and push the parameters of community development. Next slide, please, George. So beyond Scotland, what we have done in the past year, as well as coordinating networking events in Scotland as well as Europe. We've also really increased our Twitter followers, for example, in lots and lots of different nations, including Kenya, all parts of Europe. We have Twitter followers from all parts of Europe and the USA. We also have our monthly bulletin, which hopefully I'll be able to produce this week or next week. And we have lots of subscribers to our bulletin who are based in the USA and Kenya, various other parts of the African continent, as well as Australia, New Zealand. So really what we want to do is we want to learn from community development organisations around the globe, but equally we want to raise awareness of SeaDash, and that's when we get to our involvement for you with our questions. Hopefully we can discuss what is going on in other parts of the globe. Can you just move that slide till I see some of those bullet points there, George, please?
Can I zoom it in?
Yes, please.
Okay, let me see if I can. Let me just share it once again. I don't know if.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, just before we go on to our last slide, case studies. So we have case studies of good practice with our membership organisations. We also are heavily involved with IACD, and we do a number of partnership events with IACD. And as I said, we have a number of international social media followers and subscribers as well. Just before we go on to our last slide, George, which is where we're going to involve the participants, can I just ask you to just go back to slide 2 just for a moment, just so that people can see the slide? Yeah, so that's an example of some of our membership organisations. We try to be really inclusive and we reach out to all of our members. So for example, our monthly bulletin, if our membership organisations want to raise awareness of anything, any programmes or any job vacancies or any new policies, then that's what we try to do. And our monthly bulletins go out to around 1,500 people. And as Chris said, those various organisations are represented on our management group. I think that's all I have to say before we go on to our sort of questions where we're going to involve you. Chris, do you think we've sort of covered most things?
Yeah, I was just going to say there, Colette, that as well as being representative members of SeaDash, Colette actively encourages all of the 125, and I'm sure that number's higher at the moment, members to not only feed in activities that they're involved in or have become aware of, but any funding opportunities that are coming up that could support the delivery or development of community development, either at a national or a local level. Any opportunities for students to participate to enhance their learning activities at university and college, or any activity that requires wider engagement, and they'd like particular feedback from a number of our members. So when Colette references 1,500 copies of the bulletin going out, that then spreads across the wider network still further. And from the information that goes out, we find that our membership on the social media platform is continually increasing as a result of that. And we know that from the feedback that we then subsequently receive. So within the context of networking and information sharing, we're certainly hitting the mark there. And we've received very positive comments, both from members and from Scottish Government advisors when they've been having discussions about how inclusive we are about information sharing, but also the representative participation that we have at board level and events. And one of the things that we'd be keen to hear from yourselves is this something that you know is replicated in the countries and areas that you work in, or through any organisations that you're involved in through community development? So yeah, we'd be very keen to hear that from yourselves. And at the moment, from the notes I've made, we have 3 representatives here, Stella, Vic and Roxanne. So as much as this is us telling you about our role and our functions in Scotland, we are very keen to hear back from you, and the opportunity to be also presented through the question session as well. Colette?
Okay, George, could we have the last slide, please?
Okay. That's it.
Thank you, George. That's it.
Okay, so as I said, we had about 20 odd registered for this workshop. Don't know where people are. So instead of going into breakout rooms, we'll just stay in the one group, and it's about learning and sharing together, essentially. So we're just going to keep that slide up for the rest of the workshop, and I want you to just think about all of those questions to begin with. What is your experience of national strategic developments? Would you like to become a member of SeaDash or subscribe to our bulletins, publications? Would you like to get involved in our annual national conference, which we have already set the date for that? What our board members and our membership organisations are indicating to us already is that there aren't going to be face-to-face conferences going ahead this year in Scotland. So we've already made the decision, or our board has made the decision essentially to proceed with an online event, but we will probably have a smaller face-to-face event at our AGM in December. What do you like about SeaDash? And this is the part that really what we're keen to know is, are there other models like SeaDash in other parts of the globe? We want to know about organisations like SeaDash so that we can network with them and we can learn and share together. And have you suggestions on how we can improve our charity? We are a small charity. I only work 14 hours a week for SeaDash, and we try to do as much as we possibly can. So I want you to just reflect upon those 5 key questions. And timing wise, we have till about 5:15 UK time, London time. So really, we probably are going to spend only about 5 minutes on each question. But what is important to us really is that first question about thinking about strategic developments. So I think what we'll do is we'll probably spend slightly longer on that.
And Colette, before we move into our questions, I'd be keen to hear from the representatives if they have any questions, if you have any questions for us off the back of the presentation that Colette and I have just delivered. So if there's anything, please either put it in the chat or use the reactions icons just to let us know that you'd like to ask a question. And if there's nothing, then we can certainly move into the question, the first question we have.
Yes, if participants are comfortable to do an introduction so that we can all get to know each other slightly. I mean, that's what I think is why I've signed up for workshops for the duration of the conference. So if you're happy to introduce yourselves, then I'll start. Just a little bit about my background and how we can all link, because that's what I hope to gain from this conference and from our workshop is, you know, who are we and how can we link up? So as I say, I coordinate SeaDash. My background is community development and community regeneration in Scotland. I travelled a fair amount in Kenya about 25 years ago and absolutely loved Kenya. Have also travelled a lot in North America. So really I want us to be able to link up. So can I just, if you're happy to introduce yourselves, could we perhaps have Vic, then Roseanne, then Stella, if that's all right with you?
Can I stop sharing the screen for the sake of introduction?
Yes.
Yes, please, George. Thank you.
And if people want to put their videos on, it's just always nice to put a face to a name. If you're okay with that. Hello, Vic.
Hi.
I think Chris and I have done too much talking, so we want to involve everyone now for the rest of the workshop.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Vic. I was part of the delivery team for WCDC2019 in Dundee. So yeah, I'm not going to be able to speak to the things about other parts of the world because I'm living in Scotland at the moment. But yeah, I mean, my background is I actually started out life as a social worker and wasn't particularly comfortable with the dynamics in social work and the individualized kind of nature of the practice. So that kind of led me down into kind of I've always worked in the community development and community education side of things. And I've been in academia for the last 10 years and I broke free at the beginning of last year and now making my way back into the practice world, which feels like it's much more my scene. And that's where I feel much more comfortable. And yeah, the reason I kind of came to this session, because I actually, although I've heard a lot about SeaDash, I actually didn't really know much about in terms of actually your structure and how you function. So I thought it was a really good shortcut way to kind of reconnect and find out more about how you work. So that was really useful. Thank you.
Thanks. Is it Roxanne and then Stella? Thanks.
Hi, so I'm Roxanne. I'm coming from Bristol, so not too far. I'm a community development coordinator. I work for the Bristol Dementia Wellbeing Service. So very much about ensuring access into dementia services. I come from a dementia support background, so a bit of a change, but very much like Vic, getting frustrated with the sort of individualised nature of the work. So that's kind of my background. I wanted to hear more about what's happening up in Scotland. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening. Having gone to the conference in Dundee as well, I'm very interested in following a bit more about what's happening in Scotland. So that's why I've come along today.
Thanks, Roxanne. And Stella.
Stella, are you happy to introduce yourself? if you can unmute.
Maybe still is having some technical difficulties there.
Olga, and then George, maybe you could tell us as well. So Olga, do you want to say hello?
I think we're scaring people off now.
Okay.
George, our technical whiz kid. Hello, George.
Hello, people. I'm glad to be part of the support team for this workshop. My background is not on community development. I'm more of in statistics and economics, but I'm just part of the conference in terms of technical support. It has been a good sharing, and I'm gaining much more interest to really look at what community development all entails. I think after this conference, I'll be part of the team. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
A convert.
I don't know if we want to put the questions back up on the screen, so that's the last slide, George, or do you just want to read it out? What is your experience of national strategic developments? What would work best, Vic and Roxanne? What would you prefer?
From my perspective, I don't know. I'm not sure how much I can add in terms of the knowledge that you and Chris have got is probably exceeds mine anyway. So, but I guess it would be useful to hear from Roxanne in terms of how things are in England at the moment. And I guess particularly given the current pressures that people are facing, it might be useful just to kind of hear a little bit about what you're experiencing.
It's a bit of a difficult one because I have just a couple of weeks ago just got back from maternity leave, so I'm still kind of getting my head around everything again. So I'm not too sure how much I'll be able to offer in terms of an update with the current situation. Yeah, sorry, I can't be more help.
That's fine. One of the things that I can definitely say is that as part of the manifesto that the SNP, the Scottish now Scottish Government lead, put out in the recent elections, they agreed to a full review of community education, or CLD, across Scotland, with a view to improving and enhancing the role of CLD. So within that context, community development, we feel very fortunate in the fact that we have very close links within the Scottish Government at directorate level to influence the decision making and the thinking around policy development. And as I said at the start in the introduction, we don't have within Scotland a specific policy or a strategy for community development. There are a number of formative, such as the Community Empowerment Act, policies and strategies that the government have enacted, but nothing specifically targeted or tailored for community development. So that's something that as a board, SeaDash are looking at bringing into play. And there's a discussion that Colette and I have been having ad infinitum for the past few months as to whether it should be a strategy document or a framework document to build on. Within the broader suite of CLD, we have moved in this past year from a statement of ambition for adult learning to a strategy document that's going to be released later this year. And that will be married alongside the youth work strategy that had pre-existed but has since been enhanced and developed. So that's also due for release. And alongside the adult learning strategy, there's a framework for family learning and ESOL. So within that broad suite that sits within the governance of the CLD Standards Council, community development sits alone in that we don't sit within the contextual framework of community education and Education Scotland, and we don't have the same review and governance elements that have been put in place to ensure a quality of practice. So we are very keen to develop both a framework that leads onto a strategy, or just go into a strategy that's accepted by ministers and the Scottish Government overall. So any thoughts on that?
Can I ask a question? Just a couple of things. So in terms of the review of education and CLD education, what do you think were the motivations for that? And that kind of links to my other thought, which is, are you picking up, do you think that there is a recognition of the centrality of community development in the kind of social structures and the social challenges that we're going to be facing over the next few years? So like one of the presentations, I think the first keynote this morning was saying about the centrality of CLD and community development in some of the challenges we're going to be facing. Is that what underpins the revision of education as well, or is it a different motivation, a different reason for that?
I think from a Scottish perspective, and that's the only position I can speak from, this stems back to a proposal that came from John Swinney when he was the Cabinet Secretary for Education, and he tried to bring in CLD and education under the one banner. And that argument, I think, lasted until it was completely sunk in 2016 into 17. And then you had the newly formed emergence of Education Scotland with the recognised adult learning and youth work elements bolted into education and Education Scotland, and community development sat out with, because it was seen to exist within the empowerment framework, and therefore came under a separate Cabinet Secretary's role and responsibility. Now they've merged everything under one Cabinet Secretary. So I think they see an opportunity now to revisit that argument that was first proffered in 2016 by John Swinney, and try and bring it all together under one Cabinet Secretary's role and remit. And whilst community development doesn't have that strategy element to it, it's, as I've kept referring back to, built into and intertwined into almost every piece of policy, from empowerment to engagement to place planning and place standards to health and well-being. So it's a case of unpicking that, creating that framework, and saying you cannot have community development built in as just a reference to within documentation, when it's a recognized professional field of practice, and therefore should have its own recognized framework and contextualized within a strategy or a policy document. So that's my personal position, and an argument that I take forward at SeaDash meetings. Colette.
Just to try and answer your question, Vic, I think that in some ways the whole principle of strength and collective action has worked quite well for CLD practitioners, because they have the Standards Council, for example, and they have a large number of members. So I think where they have gained strength is in that collective action. Whereas I think we find that where the gaps lie is the need for community development practitioners to have robust frameworks and robust, potentially, strategies relating to community development. So it's where the two things come together, but where in some respects they differ.
Okay, thank you.
It'll be interesting to see how that's lifted at a UK national level by the English, well, the UK government as they roll forward their proposals for community development.
I just had a...
Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, did you want to come in, Roxanne?
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to ask a little bit about the history of SeaDash and how it started and when it started, really.
The history of SeaDash was that the community development organisations in Scotland identified a gap, and because they identified a gap, they came together to formulate SeaDash. So some of the original founding members actually are at the conference today. Stuart Murdoch, who's based in Dundee, he was an original board member of SeaDash. So it was felt that it was about a need and a gap because there wasn't anything in existence prior to SeaDash. Then it became a registered Scottish charity. And as I said in the presentation, we now have 13 board members on our board. With someone else, shall we, Debbie?
Yes.
Is there? Hmm? So yes, I mean, Chris and I were interested to know, are there other national strategies in other countries, but are you, I mean, Vic, your background in university settings, were you aware of that were there a lot of national strategies in other nations?
I don't, to be honest, I'm not sure. The country I have most knowledge of is Brazil. I've got kind of connections going back there for quite a long time now, and no is the answer. So the community development practice in Brazil is it's essentially social movements who are kind of spearheading it. So it's very much grassroots and doesn't really have any kind of formal framework at a national level at all. So there's a lot of, having said that, other parts, so for example, social work education has a lot stronger community development aspects to it. So there's, in terms of that individual and collective kind of frustration that I was feeling, and Roxanne said you were feeling that too, that comes across less so. So actually the social work frameworks actually cover a lot of the community development practice in Brazil. And in terms of kind of public health as well, there's a lot of public health frameworks that also kind of cover some of the things that we would think of as kind of community development practice as well. But no, it's kind of, again, it's a little bit, there's a bit that fits here and a bit that fits there and a bit that fits under another kind of the main. There's not a recognized profession or anything like that. So it's kind of, it's you have educadores, educators that you can have kind of, you can study to be an educator, but that's, and be employed to be an educator, and that's kind of very, very, very broad. I really like it as a model. I think, you know, in terms of education, the underpinning factor of an educador is someone who works with people and you learn together. That's kind of just the underpinning kind of philosophy behind it. But they work under lots of different streams of policy, basically. That's the only kind of place that I can really kind of speak to.
Thanks, Vic. Chris, will we go on to the next question, or?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as SeaDash, is it something that you think is is a good model? Would you like to subscribe to our publications, get involved, have your say? But as I said at the start, we have 125 national organisations that are members, but we also have individuals who subscribe to our bulletins and can come along to our conferences and things like that. So really on our questions there we had, would you like to become a member of SeaDash or subscribe to our information? So really it's to put that to you, and also what is it about SeaDash that you think it potentially is quite good? So what did you like about our presentation? Anyone? Right.
I don't want to. I'm kind of waiting. I don't want to jump in. I think it's that the collective kind of voice at a national level. I think that is the strength, and that people have a point of reference to go to, where they can. Yeah. So as an individual organisation, we have lots of individual organisations doing very good work, but it takes a lot of effort and energy to be working at the kind of policy level and influencing at that kind of national level. So to be able to have a means by which to feed up, and then you can then feed in to the conversations you're having at government level, like you were saying, Chris, earlier on, about having the connections, having networks so that you can have people that you can just pick up the phone to, have a conversation with, and you're aware that that knowledge is being fed into networks that have an impact and have an influence. Sorry, my daughter's just come in the room. Just hold on 1 minute. So that's the bit for me, that it's not you're providing, I want to say a shortcut, but that makes it sound like a bad thing, but you're providing a mechanism by which people can actually feed their views in, and that's what we're all about in terms of flattening hierarchies.
Yeah. As the national network organisation, we're also very keen not to duplicate the roles that are already occupied by other organisations. So we won't go in and speak for and on behalf of the professional body. We see that very much as a CLD standards role and remit, although if there's an element of justification for us to have a discussion with the Standards Council around that, we will. And that's why we were keen to ensure that the Standards Council were represented on the SeaDash board, so that it wasn't a decision that came too late in the day and we'd already gone down that route. And similarly so with the Scottish Community Development Network, they're representing the practitioners, the face of the people on the ground, whether they're paid, unpaid, volunteers or statutory representatives delivering community development. So their voice is fed up through that network and back into SeaDash, so that there's a continuity of information that's coming in as well as going out, and it's the same with all of the representative board members. Within the structure of the membership, we're just about to go out shortly to each of the members to ask them to come back with both case studies and examples of the role that they play within community development, so that we've got an additionality to the discussions that we have at minister level and at directorate level within Scottish Government, so that there's a justification to the discussions and a focus of direction to the debates that we will no doubt have. Colette said quite clearly earlier, though, she's got limited time. And I mentioned earlier on the limitation within the resources that we all have to operate in. SeaDash is investing its financial resources in Colette as a coordinator, and everybody else is putting in the time that they can from by representing their organisations into SeaDash, but also over and above that, ensuring that SeaDash has a strong voice. And again, that's very difficult. So we'd like to expand that role of SeaDash to have some parity, not necessarily to have the full resources of YouthLink Scotland or Adult Learning Scotland through YouthLink, and even YouthLink is minimal in the representation it has, but just to ensure that there's a parity of representation, and that way ensuring that when Scottish ministers are going out and having those discussions with heads of local authorities and the heads of the NHS and said, yeah, community development's the way to go. And there are all these practitioners out there. It's not just an off the head comment, but it's actually backed up by resources. And they can say, well, actually the reality on the ground is the resource isn't there to deliver that either at third sector level or at statutory level, but the government will put in the resource to ensure that when we come up with a community development based idea, whether it's on place planning or health and well-being, that the resources will be there to meet that. So that's very much a role that we see for, or the role for SeaDash in partnership, but resourced from the top through. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Do you think that's coming? Is the question, I guess, is a follow-up.
I think that we are better placed now to ensure that that's coming. And I think with the full review of CLD or ComEd that the Scottish Government have promised, then that there's a good chance that we'll get better resourced. I'm not going to say we're going to get fantastically well resourced, but better resourced than we are. And I think that has to stretch across into academia as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean,
Colette?
question, sorry, put Roxanne on spot, I guess, as well, in terms of there's an element of I mean, I came up from England, so in terms of it was only actually when I came to Scotland that I could actually teach on an explicit community development programme because they didn't really exist down south. And so, yeah, I mean, do you think, Roxanne, I mean, do you hear about community development? Is it even talked about in those terms for you in your practice? And do you think there's a space for it, I guess, is a question for you.
I think it's a little bit difficult because actually, so I'm part of employed within the NHS organisation, and a bit of a unique role within that. So quite often people don't really understand the community development role because sort of on the ground, yeah, there isn't as much as maybe what you have in Scotland. I think what really appealed to me about the SeaDash during your presentation was the kind of opportunities to learn and the development and the sharing and that whole learning from each other as well. I think it's a great model, and I think that's what sort of stood out for me as well about how useful that model would be.
I'd certainly say that subject to all restrictions being lifted for wider engagement and face-to-face working, we'd be happy to share our experience and the learning that we've been through with any of your partners that you're working with in England. Colette, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I think that kind of takes us nicely on to the question of the annual conference, because the whole thing about learning and sharing, Roxanne, is that whole thing of, well, actually, we need to be guided by listening to not only our members, but beyond our members as to what is of interest and what is relevant in order for people to learn from each other through our conference. For example, we also do networking events which we get great feedback from. But for the purposes of our conference in September, if I was to sort of pose the question of what would you think would be relevant themes, what would you say to that?
For me, I think in terms of how can we, I guess the challenge has always been with community development is that because the breadth of the profession, it's how can we celebrate the specialism of breadth as a specialism in a way, that, you know, I think there's a lot happening at the moment around much more awareness of well-being economies, alternative economies, and I think community development has to play a central part in those conversations. Sustainability as well, kind of can play a central role, and I guess how to engage in those conversations and show what we can bring, and the kind of the skill set that the practitioners and the profession can bring to those conversations. So just in the last couple of weeks, I've kind of had various conversations with people who are trying to get involved in activities, kind of grassroots work, and actually just getting really frustrated because people don't have the facilitation skills, or they feel like they're reinventing the wheel. And actually, I think there's a lot that we could bring to that dialogue and those conversations. And yeah, so how do you have the breadth of understanding, and the kind of all of these things are starting at community, be it a community garden that's actually motivated by climate change, rather than community development, but community development needs to be central to it as well. And so how to have those kind of conversations and be the overarching umbrella, I guess. That's kind of how I see it, is that you can have all these different strands and different movements that we need to kind of make the social change, and then almost community development can kind of almost be the umbrella that links them all together. So yeah, no small question.
Yeah, so I know you're not at Dundee University now, but what are you actually doing now, Vic? Where are you still in Dundee, or where are you?
Yeah, I'm still in Dundee, but I'm freelance. So kind of, yeah, there's been lots of changes in my life in the last year and a half. So yeah, I'm kind of just doing kind of freelance work. And the biggest change being I now home educate my daughter. So she didn't go back to school after lockdown. So basically I'm trying to earn money whilst home educating, which is a hard task. So.
I think those are some really good points that potentially could start to shape themes for our conference, and I would suggest that we involve you if you'd be happy to be involved without committing to lots and lots of hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Roxanne, any thoughts on gaps or emerging themes that we should consider at our conference?
I think in one of the talks I was at earlier, there was an interesting discussion that came out of it, really, which I think you could have a whole conference on. Again, quite a big topic, but it was also almost around sort of how we measure effectiveness, and the sort of move to prove effectiveness, and how that then takes away from the sort of bigger picture as well about what, you know. I think the person speaking about it sort of said about sort of effectiveness, impact on effect, and a sort of idea of sort of overwatering a plant. And, you know, I think it's a big topic. I think there's now ever increasing pressures to kind of how are we showing what we do and the effect of what we do, when actually a lot of that change and a lot of the impact isn't easily captured through statistics or whatever means. How are we sort of I think that's a big topic I'd really like to know, explore more.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And again, what I've kind of gained from the conference so far, when I've listened to some of the speakers this morning, was exactly your point there, Roxanne, about where I was questioning the whole thing about, well, where are we seeing this policy and practice coming together? Because certainly it would appear that the academics perhaps have the time to look at all the theory side, but frontline practitioners, perhaps the scope for improving how they actually evidence the impact. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it's where a lot of people fall down is the completer finisher tasks, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Chris?
Yeah, I was just thinking, do we end up, and I'm thinking of this from the position of a practitioner, do we end up delivering community development to fit the thematics of a measurement tool and a response, whether it's from external funders or governing bodies, that then have a greater say and sway in the practice and process of community development. So if, for example, it's a registered social landlord that has decided that they've identified a need to improve and enhance an area that in Scotland is recognised as high tariff SIMD area, so area of multiple deprivation, and they want to target the resources into that and bring it in a community development approach. By doing so, have they already written the script whereby the return at the end is their perspective on what community development is, rather than context of what the community needed in the first place? So has the community development practice been pre-shaped before it's actually delivered, and therefore not really community development, just the outcome of a predetermination of the funding body? And who's got the skill to argue against that and have that challenging discussion?
I think, sorry, Colette, do you want to come in?
No, I'll see. You go first.
Yeah, I think there's definitely space for that in terms of like some of the organisations I respect the most are the ones who are very, very clear about their boundaries as an organisation and their principles, and they enter quite confidently into dialogues with funders. And I think there's a lot of interesting things happening in Scotland around relationships with funders. I think there are a lot of funders who have a much better understanding of community development now and are kind of aligned in terms of principles and practice. So potentially there's something there in terms of that learning that's gone on, like the relationships that have been developed between not just from people on the ground, but people who are funding organisations as well, and how that can be learned from, how that experience can be kind of shared, I guess. Yeah. Could be quite interesting.
I think that's something that could be built into the conference, Colette, is the shared learning from experience and the changes that have been that have emerged over the past 2 or 3 years, as Vic was indicating there, from large organisational funders, and there certainly has been a lot of change that's recognised now. So I'm just trying to remember the name of the former TSB grouping, and it will come to me anyway. Sorry, I digress. Roxanne, do you have any additional comment on that?
No, it just sounds like it's going to be a great conference. You've got your work cut out for you though.
It's all right, Colette keeps us right.
I just I had a point, it was just before Vic came in there, and it was relating to evidence and impact, etc. That's where I feel really, really strongly about performance management frameworks and about effective management practice. And that's where, if those areas are in place, then that's where it can be evidenced a bit more effectively. So, for example, where we have performance management frameworks that ask the question, who has identified the need, then potentially then you're getting the evidence base of, well, it's the local community, as opposed to it being one person at a senior strategic level. So I think in some respects, that's the kind of thing that we need to ensure. It's like, well, who has been involved and who has identified need? Yeah. So in Scotland, we do have some performance management frameworks which help workers and practitioners through that process, including the LEAP framework, which specifically asks who has identified this, which would then imply that it isn't just funders who are saying, well, actually, this is what we think we should do. It's actually has to be evidence that it's local communities that are saying that that's what they want. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Colette, the time, believe it or not, the time's against us now. So we're going to start winding things up. And I just remembered the two names of the charities that have made significant adjustments to their programs and processes, and Cora is the one that was formerly the Lloyds TSB Charitable Trust, and Robertson Trust the other. So there's an opportunity there to bring them in for discussions. So on behalf of Colette and I from SeaDash, thank you for your participation and your discussion. George, thank you very much for your support on the tech side. It's been really helpful.
Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah. So networking sessions up next. So more opportunity to talk. And we hope to see you back with and having further discussions with SeaDash through our networking systems. So thank you very much. Thanks, Roxanne.
Can I just finish off by saying on the first slide, George, it had links to our website, to our Twitter. So SeaDash, at SeaDash Scotland is our Twitter. So please have a look, please start following us and email me or contact me and we can have further discussion.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Colette.
much.
Thanks, everyone.